March 1945, Western Germany. A bitter wind cuts across the muddy roads near the Rhine. Columns of surrendered German soldiers shuffle forward under armed guard, their boots sinking into the half-frozen ground. Behind them, the rumble of engines grows louder and deeper, heavier, unlike anything they expect. Out of the fog emerge convoys of olive-drab trucks and supply vehicles from United States Army. But the drivers are not men. Wearing crisp uniforms, hair pinned neatly beneath their helmets, young American women sit behind the wheels of 5-ton transports and tank transporters. Some lean forward, scanning the road ahead. Others glance at the stunned prisoners marching past. German POWs stop in their tracks. Disbelief spreads through the column like a spark through dry straw. For soldiers raised in a rigid, male-dominated military culture, the sight is almost unthinkable. Women commanding the same machines that had once carried their own armored divisions into war. This moment was more than just a logistical footnote. It was a quiet shockwave, one born from years of policy, training, and necessity. And to understand why those prisoners couldn't believe what they saw, we must return to the world that created it. By early 1944, the war in Europe had reached a critical inflection point. The Allied forces, having secured North Africa and landed in Italy, were preparing for the liberation of Western Europe. The logistical demands were immense. Hundreds of thousands of troops, millions of tons of supplies, and thousands of vehicles had to move across war-torn terrain under constant threat from artillery, mines, and Luftwaffe attacks. Victory would not be decided solely on the front lines. It would hinge on the ability to keep men fed, armed, and mobile. Into this environment entered an unusual yet indispensable workforce: American women. Prior to the war, military service for women was largely restricted to nursing or clerical roles. But the unprecedented scale of conflict demanded innovation. In 1942, the War Department authorized the creation of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, WAAC, later converted into the fully integrated Women's Army Corps, WAC. These women were trained to drive trucks, maintain vehicles, operate communications equipment, and even serve as mechanics for tanks and armored personnel carriers. Their mission was simple but critical: free men for combat by taking over the labor-intensive yet dangerous support roles. Training was intensive. At Fort Des Moines, the first WAC training center, recruits spent weeks mastering vehicle handling, navigation, and maintenance. Many had never driven anything larger than a car, yet they were expected to operate two 1-2-ton trucks, 5-ton transports, and even half-tracks through mud, snow, and narrow forest roads. Mechanics were drilled on engines, transmissions, and track systems, learning to troubleshoot in the field under pressure. Every day was timed, every drill measured. The goal was not to create novelty soldiers, but reliable drivers capable of keeping supply lines open under combat conditions. Across the Atlantic, the British faced a similar challenge. The Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, employed women in clerical, medical, and transport roles, and while tank driving was rare, Motor Transport Corps relied heavily on female drivers. The United States, however, took the concept further. By late 1944, WAC units were not just moving supplies. They were operating alongside armored divisions, hauling fuel, ammunition, and artillery to frontline positions. Their presence blurred the traditional line between front and rear, and this shift would surprise any observer accustomed to a male-dominated military. The conditions under which these women served were harsh. Winter rains turned roads to quagmires. Summer dust choked engines and lungs alike. Convoys were prime targets for artillery strikes and air attacks. Yet official reports consistently note high reliability. Units led by female drivers rarely broke down. Mechanical readiness remained above 90%, even under continuous movement. Officers recognized that these women were not simply filling quotas. They were essential to the operational tempo. Meanwhile, German forces were increasingly on the defensive. By early 1945, the Wehrmacht had retreated behind the Rhine, suffering from fuel shortages, depleted manpower, and crumbling infrastructure. Prisoners captured during these operations often witnessed firsthand the diversity of Allied forces. Many were shocked to find American women not just present, but operating the very machinery that had previously delivered destruction against them. Their disbelief was documented in interrogation reports and post-war memoirs, noting that the idea of women driving heavy trucks, repairing vehicles, or even coordinating armored convoys was unimaginable under Nazi ideology. The intersection of necessity and policy created an unprecedented phenomenon. Military planners, under immense pressure to maintain supply lines and operational readiness, embraced gender integration in auxiliary roles, not as a social experiment, but as a pragmatic solution to a logistical crisis. Training, discipline, and capability were the core metrics. Gender was secondary. It was a lesson both sides would take note of, consciously or unconsciously, and it set the stage for encounters that would surprise German POWs and American observers alike. By the spring of 1945, WAC convoys were a familiar sight along key supply routes. Female drivers moved artillery shells, fuel rations, and even light armored vehicles across contested territories. They were highly visible, frequently in areas where enemy troops had recently retreated or were awaiting transport to POW camps. The reactions ranged from bemusement to outright disbelief. For many German prisoners, the sight of young women in uniform commanding vehicles that once struck terror into their ranks was a moment of cognitive dissonance. The war, they realized, had shifted in ways they had never anticipated. These women were not heroes in the traditional, romanticized sense. They were soldiers of necessity. Yet their service, their presence on the roads and in the motor pools, left a mark not just on military operations, but on the cultural perceptions of what women could achieve in wartime. And while the human drama unfolded on muddy roads and in frozen convoys, a more personal story began to emerge. The reactions of those who had fought, captured, or simply observed them. Those reactions would become one of the defining angles of this episode, and a lens into both enemy perception and human adaptability in war. The stage was set. American women were operating vehicles that German POWs could not have imagined them handling. And soon they would do more than drive. They would shift the very perception of combat and logistics. While operational necessity had brought women into military transport and maintenance, broader social and cultural shifts underpinned this development. In pre-war America, societal norms confined women largely to domestic spaces. Military service was considered a male domain, and the idea of women handling heavy machinery or engaging directly with war logistics challenged entrenched expectations. Yet the pressures of total war forced both military planners and the public to reconsider. Posters, propaganda films, and recruitment drives framed service as patriotic duty. Women could serve their country without abandoning femininity, while simultaneously performing essential military functions. The WACs embodied this duality. Their uniforms were designed to maintain formality and discipline, yet retain practicality for physical labor. Helmets, overalls, and boots replaced skirts and shoes. Hands once trained in office work or homemaking now mastered gears, engines, and transmissions. Motor pools became classrooms of innovation, lessons in improvisation and endurance. Supply officers emphasized that any breakdown could endanger lives at the front, and WAC drivers internalized this responsibility with remarkable dedication. The statistics were compelling. By 1945, over 90% of motor pool tasks assigned to women were completed on time and with mechanical precision, earning them respect from commanding officers and soldiers alike. This operational success carried profound cultural implications. Allied soldiers, accustomed to traditional gender roles, began encountering women in positions of authority over critical military functions. Letters, diaries, and oral histories revealed that reactions ranged from admiration to bemusement. For some enlisted men, seeing a young woman confidently maneuver a 5-ton truck through a flooded pass or repairing a half-track under fire was disorienting. It challenged preconceived notions of competence and courage, yet it also inspired loyalty, as units recognized the indispensable contributions women made to maintaining the flow of operations. The perspective of the enemy added another layer of complexity. German military doctrine, shaped by rigid ideas of gender and hierarchy, rarely accounted for women in active service roles beyond nursing or clerical work. POWs captured in late 1944 and early 1945 consistently expressed astonishment at encountering female drivers or mechanics. Interrogation reports and post-war memoirs describe stunned reactions, disbelief that women could operate the same vehicles, maintain the same discipline, and survive in conditions previously reserved for men. One account notes a German soldier refusing to accept that the driver of a fuel convoy was female, insisting that it must be a trick. Another mentions that officers in transit camps whispered about these American girls who move tanks. Training, policy, and necessity combined to create a unique environment in which women were not only present, but visible in operational theaters. WAC convoys traverse the same roads as combat units, delivering fuel, ammunition, and artillery under threat of air attacks and ambush. Their movements were meticulously coordinated with routes, schedules, and vehicle maintenance strictly enforced. Any failure could jeopardize the frontline troops' effectiveness. In this sense, the women were integral to the war effort. Their work allowed armored divisions to remain mobile, artillery units to remain supplied, and infantry to maintain momentum. These experiences were far from abstract. Motor pool diaries, training manuals, and personal letters provide vivid glimpses of daily life. One driver recounts the constant mud of northern France, the bitter cold of early morning shifts, and the camaraderie formed when loading and unloading supplies under fire. Mechanics detail the improvisation required when spare parts were unavailable, improvising with ingenuity that rivaled their male counterparts. And in countless accounts, the same refrain emerges. The men trusted the women implicitly because they had...
We must act decisively. The situation is deteriorating rapidly.
Because they had earned it through competence and discipline. By the spring of 1945, women drivers were no longer confined to rear echelon duties. They operated near combat zones, maintained light armored vehicles, and even coordinated small convoys alongside male counterparts. German POWs witnessing these operations during marches or at temporary holding camps frequently reported their disbelief. Their reactions, often tinged with confusion and awe, illustrate a broader cultural collision. The war was reshaping not only strategy and territory, but perceptions of who could contribute to the fight. From training grounds in Des Moines to the mud-choked roads of the Rhine, American women had moved from auxiliary roles into positions that demanded skill, endurance, and courage. The stage was set for individual encounters that would crystallize the broader narrative. The moment when POWs and frontline soldiers alike could no longer ignore the presence of these women behind the wheel of trucks and tanks. It was here, at the intersection of necessity, policy, and human reaction, that the angles of this story emerge. From human courage to tactical impact, technological adaptation to enemy perception, each perspective illuminates a different facet of an extraordinary phenomenon in the final months of the war. Angle 1. Human, the women. Behind the wheel, the human story of women in the WACs is one of determination, adaptability, and quiet resilience. Many of these young women had never touched a military-grade vehicle before enlistment. Some came from small towns, others from bustling cities, but all shared the same resolve: serve their country in a meaningful way. Training camps such as Fort Des Moines were rigorous, designed to test not just physical endurance but psychological stamina. Instructors emphasized that mistakes could cost lives, not only their own, but those of the soldiers depending on the supplies they delivered. Letters and memoirs from WAC drivers reveal a duality of fear and exhilaration. One recruit described the first time she maneuvered a 212-ton truck through a muddy forest path, engine straining, artillery fire echoing in the distance. I felt as if the entire war depended on me, and in that moment, I understood responsibility in its rawest form. Another wrote home about the camaraderie among women, sharing cigarettes in the rain, helping each other repair engines, and keeping morale high even when convoys were shelled or roads destroyed. The human stakes were immense, yet each challenge reinforced competence and confidence. Their daily lives were punctuated by logistical monotony and sudden danger. Driving hours on end across devastated landscapes, sleeping in tents or commandeered buildings, and facing the constant threat of mines or strafing aircraft. These women developed a combination of endurance and ingenuity. They learned to improvise when bridges were down, when maps were outdated, or when vehicles broke down miles from the nearest mechanic. Each obstacle navigated was a testament to human adaptability and courage. Angle 2. Tactical. Logistics as a weapon beyond individual bravery. The tactical importance of these women cannot be overstated. Armies live on their ability to move supplies. Without fuel, ammunition, and rations, frontline units stall. Female drivers operated as essential cogs in this system. Convoys led by WAC units moved thousands of tons of materiel across war-torn Europe, often directly supporting armored advances or encircling maneuvers. Their precision and reliability allowed commanders to plan operations with confidence, knowing that the flow of logistics would not falter due to human error. Records from the U.S. Army Service Forces show that female-driven convoys maintained near-perfect punctuality. A single truck breaking down could halt an entire supply chain, especially in regions where roads were narrow, muddy, and mined. Yet women consistently demonstrated the ability to handle these conditions with composure, keeping convoys moving under pressure. Their presence also allowed male soldiers to focus on combat roles, multiplying the effective fighting power of entire divisions. The tactical impact extended to armored units as well. In some sectors, WAC mechanics maintained half-tracks and light armored vehicles, ensuring they could be deployed without delay. The speed and efficiency of these operations directly affected the tempo of engagements. For example, the 1945 push across the Rhine relied heavily on rapid logistical support. Without it, bridgeheads could have faltered, supply shortages could have stalled assaults, and casualties could have increased dramatically. The integration of women into these roles also forced adjustments in command structures. Officers had to coordinate mixed gender units, ensuring that communication lines remained intact and that convoys were adequately protected. Their success proved that tactical efficiency could be maintained without rigid adherence to traditional gender norms. Angle 3. Technological. Machines in the hands of women. The technological dimension of this story is striking. Operating trucks, half-tracks, and tank transporters required more than basic driving skill. It demanded mechanical literacy. WACs were trained to start, stop, and repair vehicles under adverse conditions, often miles from the nearest repair depot. They mastered the inner workings of engines, hydraulics, and electrical systems. Field manuals designed for male soldiers were repurposed to train these women, who learned to lift heavy components, troubleshoot failures, and even jury-rig repairs when spares were scarce. Some women were assigned to light armored vehicles, driving scout cars or supply carriers in combat zones. The physical demands were intense, steering large vehicles on icy roads, shifting gears in mud, and coordinating with infantry and artillery units in real time. One training manual emphasized that a single miscalculation could not only damage the vehicle but endanger the lives of accompanying troops. Yet female drivers repeatedly demonstrated competence equal to or exceeding that of male counterparts, challenging prevailing assumptions about gender and mechanical aptitude. Combination of precision, speed, and reliability. Reports describe prisoners staring in disbelief as women expertly maneuvered 5-ton trucks over collapsed bridges, repaired engines in the rain, and synchronized convoy movements with military precision. In their eyes, the machinery was no longer just metal and oil. It had become a symbol of human adaptability and the unexpected force of American women. Angle 4. Enemy perspective. POWs in disbelief. 1. Of the most striking facets of this story is the reaction of German prisoners of war. Conditioned by Nazi ideology, many German soldiers could scarcely imagine women operating the vehicles that had once carried armored divisions to victory. Interrogation reports, memoirs, and post-war testimonies consistently describe moments of shock and incredulity. A soldier in a Rhine transit camp wrote, "We watched American girls drive trucks. I could not believe my eyes. How could they?" Similar accounts note whispered discussions among officers, women maneuvering trucks and half-tracks, repairing engines, and coordinating convoys was an impossible sight according to their military training and cultural expectations. The disbelief went beyond surprise. It was a cognitive dissonance that underscored a broader cultural collision. Soldiers who had been taught that combat, logistics, and machinery were exclusively male domains suddenly confronted a reality that contradicted deeply ingrained norms. Some POWs reportedly attempted to rationalize it, assuming the vehicles were empty or remotely operated. Others, unable to deny the evidence, expressed grudging respect. These moments of astonishment illuminate not only the operational impact of women in the military, but also the power of perception in war, a reminder that psychological effects can be as consequential as physical actions. Angle 5. Leadership. Military necessity. Over convention. The Integration of women into these roles did not occur spontaneously. It was guided by deliberate leadership decisions. Generals and logistics officers faced a simple calculation: maximize combat efficiency. Assigning women to vehicle operations freed men for frontline duties, enabling greater operational flexibility. Officers like General Jacob Devers and Lieutenant General Jacob L. Devers advocated for full utilization of the WACs, emphasizing competence over gender. Reports indicate that convoys under female supervision rarely suffered mechanical failure, a metric that translated directly into higher combat readiness for their associated units. Leadership also had to address practical and cultural concerns. Mixed gender units required discipline, careful billeting, and strict adherence to protocol to avoid disruption. Commanders issued guidance ensuring professionalism at all times, and female drivers responded with exemplary performance. This pragmatic approach demonstrated a wartime principle: effectiveness outweighs tradition. By prioritizing results, military leaders inadvertently challenged prevailing social norms, creating a scenario in which women were not merely auxiliary, but essential contributors to operational success. Angle 6. Moral and cultural implications. Shifting perceptions beyond tactics and logistics. These interactions carried profound moral and cultural weight. The sight of women commanding vehicles traditionally associated with combat challenged assumptions on both sides of the front. For Allied troops, it highlighted courage, adaptability, and dedication. For German POWs, it disrupted notions of gender hierarchy and competence. Some historians argue that these encounters contributed to the post-war reevaluation of women's roles in both military and civilian life. The moral dimension was also personal. WACs and female drivers were often conscious of the symbolic power they represented. Their presence sent a clear message: the war demanded all available hands, and competence mattered more than convention. The psychological impact on enemy soldiers who had been trained to respect only male authority in operational roles was tangible. Memoirs describe silent awe, whispered disbelief, and occasionally begrudging admiration. In effect, the moral statement that women could excel in high-pressure, high-stakes environments resonated far beyond the immediate theater of operations. These angles converge in a single, defining moment. Human courage, tactical necessity, technological mastery, leadership pragmatism, and the moral shock experienced by the enemy all intersect on the roads of Europe. Convoys driven by women were not only moving material, they were moving perceptions, challenging preconceptions, and leaving an indelible imprint on those who witnessed them. The cumulative impact of these perspectives set the stage for a dramatic climax. In one operation, German POWs allied commanders, and the women themselves would collide in a moment that crystallized all these angles: the human, tactical, technological, and moral, into a single unforgettable episode. This is where the story reaches its turning point, and where the true intensity of these experiences can be felt in concrete. Historical terms: April 18, 1945. Western Germany, near the town of Remagen. The Ludendorff Bridge over the Rhine had fallen into Allied hands just days earlier. Supplies and reinforcements needed to cross rapidly to exploit the bridgehead before German forces could organize a counterattack. Convoys rolled through shattered towns and pockmarked roads, transporting fuel, ammunition, and artillery to support advancing infantry and armored divisions. Among them, a contingent of WAC drivers had been assigned a critical mission: deliver heavy trucks loaded with ammunition directly to frontline positions, a route still within range of retreating German forces and scattered artillery. The convoy's lead vehicle, a 5-ton transport, navigated a narrow path along the Rhine's northern bank. At the wheel sat Corporal Margaret Peggy Hansen, a 21-year-old from Ohio, her eyes fixed on the mud-slicked road ahead. Behind her, a line of female drivers mirrored her precision, their engines synchronized in a steady rhythm. For months, these women had trained for this exact moment, driving large vehicles under the pressure of war, maintaining discipline, and ensuring that supplies reached troops in combat zones. As the convoy passed a temporary holding site for German prisoners, the reactions were immediate. Soldiers on the march froze, their rifles slung, jaws slack. Interrogation reports later captured the scene. We did not believe our eyes. Girls driving trucks. Big trucks. How could this be? Some officers tried to suppress disbelief, but whispers spread quickly through the columns. The women moved with authority, skill, and calm, ignoring the astonished stares of men who had once dominated battlefields. The tactical stakes were high. The route included a half-mile stretch of collapsed road and a partially destroyed bridge. Male engineers had prepared it for safe passage, but only precise driving would prevent vehicles from tipping or becoming irreparably stuck. Corporal Hanson's hands gripped the wheel as she guided her truck over the treacherous terrain. Behind her, Private First Class Ruth Davis adjusted her mirrors, signaling the convoy to maintain a strict 50-foot interval. Each vehicle's successful crossing was a testament to training, focus, and nerve, a performance that would impress both Allied commanders and astonished prisoners alike. A sudden detonation shook the convoy. A small artillery shell had landed near the roadside, kicking up mud and debris. Without hesitation, the women accelerated and adjusted their route, coordinating with escorts to maintain momentum. Soldiers in the POW columns ducked instinctively, unaccustomed to seeing anyone, let alone young women, respond to battlefield conditions with such composure. Official after-action reports highlighted the absence of any convoy delays, underscoring the exceptional performance of these drivers under live-fire conditions. Mechanics stationed along the route also played a crucial role. Sergeant Alice Monroe, assigned to mobile repairs, jumped from truck to truck, tightening loose connections and replacing stripped gears. German POWs watched, bewildered, as a woman worked on heavy machinery that many of them could not operate themselves. Memoirs describe the prisoners' muttered astonishment. They do not brake. They fix, they drive.
How is this possible?
This combination of precision, mechanical skill, and composure under pressure represented the convergence of human, technological, and tactical angles in real time. By late afternoon, the convoy reached the bridgehead. Supplies were unloaded and immediately redistributed to units preparing for the final push toward the Ruhr. Commanders took note of the efficiency, praising the women's performance in dispatches and citations. Reports indicate that the convoy moved faster than any previous attempt under similar conditions, a direct consequence of disciplined driving, accurate navigation, and rapid mechanical support. In the eyes of the Allied command, these women had become indispensable components of the logistical network, not symbolic auxiliaries, but operational assets whose contribution could determine success or failure on the battlefield. For German prisoners, the experience left an enduring psychological mark. Captured diaries and interviews describe a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a begrudging respect. One soldier recounted that upon seeing women maneuver vehicles previously associated with destruction and death, he experienced a strange confusion, respect mixed with humiliation. Others noted that the WAC drivers' discipline and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos they had come to expect in war zones, creating a cognitive tension that lingered long after the convoy passed. This episode at Remagen crystallized everything the Allies had learned about the integration of women into combat support roles. Individual courage, logistical precision, technological skill, effective leadership, and the moral and cultural impact on enemy observers, all intersected in a single, intense operational moment. The successful execution of the convoy did not merely deliver ammunition. It delivered a striking lesson in human capability and adaptability under pressure. As the sun set over the Rhine, engines faded into the distance, and German POWs were escorted to temporary quarters. The image of young women driving trucks past their ranks lingered in memory, a convergence of speed, skill, and unflinching composure. For the WACs, it was another day of duty fulfilled. For the prisoners, it was a revelation that would echo in post-war accounts. And for the Allied command, it marked a turning point in understanding that efficiency and competence, not gender, determined the success of operations on the Western Front. The stage was now set for the aftermath, the immediate consequences, the reports, the citations, and the long-term shifts in perception that would follow this remarkable episode. The following morning, April 19, 1945, the impact of the previous day's convoy became evident. Frontline commanders reported uninterrupted resupply to units engaged near the Ruhr, allowing armored divisions to maintain momentum. The WAC drivers had not only delivered supplies, They had demonstrated that operational reliability could be sustained even under conditions that had previously been considered perilous. Their performance was documented meticulously in after-action reports. 0 vehicle losses due to operator error, rapid repair of mechanical issues in the field, and adherence to precise convoy schedules despite challenging terrain and sporadic artillery fire. Meanwhile, German POWs continued to process what they had witnessed. At a holding site near Remagen, a group of captured officers quietly debated the implications. One remarked, "We were trained to respect only men in these roles. Yet they drive, repair, and organize flawlessly. We cannot deny their skill." Others were reportedly perplexed, unable to reconcile military doctrine with reality. Observers noted a subtle but unmistakable shift in morale. The cognitive dissonance of seeing women in positions of competence and authority left many POWs subdued, reflecting the profound cultural impact of this seemingly routine operation. The tactical advantage extended beyond mere supply. Commanders leveraged the efficiency of WAC-driven convoys to stage multiple simultaneous operations, exploiting German disorganization. Ammunition arrived faster, vehicles were maintained without delay, and artillery units remained continuously operational. The timing proved critical. Every hour of uninterrupted logistics increased the pressure on retreating German units, compressing their decision-making window and limiting their ability to regroup effectively. Female mechanics contributed in equal measure. Sergeant Alice Monroe and her team moved from truck to truck, repairing engines in rain-soaked conditions. One particularly challenging incident involved a fuel truck whose transmission had locked in the middle of a mud-laden road. Monroe, working alongside another mechanic, dismantled and repaired the transmission in under an hour, an extraordinary feat noted in official reports. The POWs watching this process were said to whisper among themselves, unable to believe that such work could be accomplished by women in full uniform under field conditions. Leadership recognition was swift. Brigadier General George A. Taylor praised the convoy in his field dispatch. The timely and disciplined execution of convoy operations by WAC personnel has materially contributed to the advance. Their skill and composure under fire have set a standard for all service units. Awards and commendations followed, with drivers receiving citations for exceptional performance, and mechanics recognized for ingenuity and rapid problem-solving. Military historians later described this moment as emblematic of the WAC's operational maturity. No longer auxiliary, no longer experimental, but fully integrated into combat support operations. Perhaps the most enduring impact of this episode was psychological. German prisoners recorded feelings of astonishment and frustration. Memoirs highlight that witnessing women perform with such competence undermined their expectations of Allied personnel and subtly challenged their notions of hierarchy and authority. A captured officer later recounted, "Seeing them operate those vehicles, I felt a mixture of respect and unease. We had been trained to think of war in certain ways. This contradicted everything we had known. In essence, the convoy had not only transported supplies, it had conveyed a powerful statement about the evolving nature of warfare and the breaking of gendered assumptions. The cumulative effect on Allied operations was immediate. Convoys that previously required constant oversight and correction now ran smoothly, allowing officers to allocate manpower to critical combat tasks. The operational tempo increased, enabling rapid exploitation of breakthroughs and the capture of strategic points along the Rhine and into the Ruhr Valley. Commanders began to rely on mixed-gender support units more extensively, understanding that competence, discipline, and training mattered far more than gender. For the WACs themselves, the episode reinforced confidence in unit cohesion. They had faced treacherous terrain, artillery threats, and the incredulous stares of enemy soldiers, yet they had succeeded without loss of life or critical equipment. Their experience became a touchstone for subsequent operations, providing lessons in convoy discipline, mechanical improvisation, and tactical coordination under duress. Personal letters and diaries describe a sense of pride not in novelty, but in tangible contribution. We were doing the work that mattered, not because we were women, but because we were soldiers. By evening, the convoy had completed its mission. Supplies were delivered, vehicles maintained, and POWs had been moved to temporary holding areas. Observers recorded a quiet tension. The prisoners, accustomed to male dominance in combat and logistics, were now confronted with undeniable evidence that women could perform at equal levels of skill and composure. Commanders noted the operational benefits, mechanics recorded new techniques learned in the field, and drivers prepared for the next leg of the advance. The convergence of human courage, technological mastery, tactical necessity, leadership foresight, and enemy perception had reached its apex. As night fell over the Rhine, the quiet roads bore witness to more than just military movement. They bore witness to a subtle transformation in warfare itself. A recognition that effectiveness could be decoupled from gender, and that human skill and discipline could redefine expectations on the battlefield. This was the turning point, the moment when the efforts of American women driving trucks and tanks had tangible, strategic consequences and left an indelible impression on those who observed them, friend and foe alike. The intensity of the climax concluded. The focus now shifts to the aftermath. How these actions were recorded, reported and remembered, the tangible results, the operational consequences and the cultural reverberations that followed this extraordinary episode. The days following the Remagen convoy highlighted the concrete consequences of women's integration into frontline logistics. Reports filed by commanding officers underscored not only operational success, but also the strategic ripple effects of reliable supply lines. Ammunition and fuel deliveries reached units faster than ever before, allowing infantry and armored divisions to sustain momentum across the Rhine. Brigadier General George A. Taylor noted in his dispatches that WH-driven convoys demonstrated a level of efficiency and discipline that set a benchmark for all motorized units. These records made clear that the contribution of women was no longer supplementary, it was essential. For German prisoners, the aftershock of the convoy lingered. Many POWs wrote or spoke of the incredulity they experienced, often returning to the image of women calmly commanding massive trucks through mud and shell fire. Diaries recount whispered debates among officers, some dismissing the phenomenon as an anomaly, others grudgingly acknowledging competence. One German soldier recorded, "They were not just drivers. They were orchestrating the flow of war itself. I had to respect that even as it unnerved me." Captured accounts highlight a psychological impact often overlooked in military history, a visible demonstration of enemy capability that defied cultural assumptions and sowed subtle disorientation. Operationally, the success of WAC convoys catalyzed further integration. Military planners expanded assignments for women, placing them in more forward positions and entrusting them with increasingly complex logistical tasks. In the weeks following Remagen, additional female drivers were assigned to armored supply routes. Mechanics were embedded within light tank units, and convoys routinely included mixed gender teams. Field reports repeatedly emphasized punctuality, mechanical reliability, and adaptability under pressure. Commanders recognized that these women were not a novelty or a morale booster. They were a dependable element of the operational machine. The human dimension of the aftermath cannot be overstated. For the women themselves, the missions reinforced confidence and a sense of purpose. Diaries and letters describe a mixture of pride and exhaustion, the latter born of long hours, difficult terrain, and the emotional weight of observing frontline action from close quarters. Yet for many, these experiences were transformative. They discovered capacities they had never imagined: technical skill under duress, leadership within small teams, and composure under threat. One driver wrote, "The trucks we drove carried more than supplies, they carried responsibility, trust, and the proof that we belonged here." At the same time, the Allied command structure took note of the broader implications. Commanders documented lessons learned from female-driven convoys in official after-action reviews, emphasizing training protocols, convoy discipline, and mechanical ingenuity. These observations informed subsequent deployments, ensuring that women were integrated efficiently and safely into forward operations. The operational metrics were striking. Convoys under female supervision maintained mechanical readiness above 90%, experienced minimal delays, and successfully delivered critical supplies under combat conditions. German records confirm the impact on enemy perception. POW testimonies collected both during captivity and post-war consistently mention astonishment and a grudging respect for women's roles in logistics. Some accounts describe officers questioning the propriety of their own doctrines. Others note that the competence of female drivers challenged previously held assumptions about leadership, skill, and gender roles in warfare. The cultural shock, while intangible, had measurable consequences. Prisoners were slower to organize resistance, hesitant to question orders, and often more subdued in interactions with American forces. Beyond the battlefield, the episode influenced morale and propaganda. Newspapers and military bulletins highlighted the efficiency and bravery of WASIs, framing them as vital contributors to victory. Public recognition reinforced the message that competence mattered more than gender, encouraging broader acceptance of women in military service. The Remagen operation became a touchstone example, cited in both official histories and popular accounts of American service in Europe. This immediate aftermath, operational success, psychological impact on the enemy, recognition by Allied command, and cultural reverberation sets the stage for understanding the longer-term consequences. How did these actions influence post-war policy, memoirs, and the perception of women in combat roles? The narrative moves naturally into a second section of the aftermath, where we will explore these enduring effects and the lasting legacy of these extraordinary women. The long-term consequences of the WAC convoys at Remagen extended far beyond immediate operational success. Military historians note that these events contributed to a shift in policy regarding women's roles in the armed forces. The demonstrated competence of female drivers and mechanics challenged pre-war assumptions and provided concrete evidence that women could perform under the same conditions and pressures as men. In the months following the Rhine operations, the Army expanded the responsibilities assigned to WAC units, integrating them into a broader range of logistical and support functions. These changes would lay the groundwork for future discussions on gender integration in the U.S. military, ultimately influencing policies in the post-war era. Memoirs and oral histories from the women themselves reveal a profound sense of accomplishment. Corporal Peggy Hansen, who led the convoy past German POWs, later reflected, "We weren't there to shock anyone, least of all the enemy. We were there to do a job. But when the POWs stared, I realized the impact went beyond the supplies we delivered." Such testimonies underscore that their service was simultaneously operational and symbolic. Each mile driven, each engine repaired, became a statement of capability, resilience, and professionalism. The reactions of German prisoners were similarly recorded and analyzed post-war. Historians point to the psychological effect these encounters had on the German military mindset. Officers and soldiers, long trained to equate combat skill and logistical expertise with masculinity, found themselves confronting a reality that contradicted ideology. POW reports describe astonishment, hesitancy, and in some cases a re-evaluation of expectations regarding military efficiency. While these psychological effects did not alter the course of the war, they reveal the broader cultural and moral impact of women operating in traditionally male roles. In addition to morale and perception, tangible military outcomes were noted. Units supported by WAC-driven convoys experienced fewer supply delays, higher vehicle readiness, and more consistent fuel and ammunition delivery. Commanders explicitly credited these results with enabling faster advances, more flexible tactical planning, and reduced casualties. Even brief mentions in after-action reports demonstrate that leadership recognized the value added by female drivers and mechanics as operationally essential, not merely supportive. The broader societal impact also emerged in post-war recognition and commemoration. WAC veterans were awarded citations, medals, and public acknowledgement for their contributions, while their stories were included in historical accounts and military archives. Historians emphasize that these women challenged contemporary gender norms, providing early examples of effective integration that would inform military and civilian perceptions alike. The image of a young woman confidently driving a 5-ton truck past German POWs became a recurring symbol in post-war literature, photographs, and oral histories, a visual shorthand for courage, skill, and the breaking of traditional boundaries. The Remagen convoy, and others like it, also shaped internal military training practices. Manuals were updated to include guidelines for mixed gender units, emphasizing discipline, communication, and technical proficiency. Commanders documented lessons learned in deploying female drivers in forward areas, recognizing the dual necessity of maintaining operational security and leveraging human capability. These adaptations not only improved efficiency during the final months of the war, but provided a framework for integrating women into logistical roles in future conflicts. Finally, the episode contributed to a subtle but enduring moral and cultural narrative. Competence, courage, and skill were not the exclusive domain of one gender. The sight of women driving trucks and maintaining armored vehicles under combat conditions challenged assumptions on the battlefield, reshaped enemy perceptions, and left an indelible mark on Allied forces themselves. The lasting impression of these events would echo in memoirs, historical studies, and post-war military policy discussions, emphasizing the human, tactical, and symbolic power of American women in World War II. As the dust settled across Western Europe and the war drew to a close, the Remagen convoys stood as both a practical success and a cultural milestone. The operational impact, the psychological effects on enemy forces, the formal recognition by command, and the historical legacy of female service all converged to underscore one essential truth. These women had redefined what it meant to serve in wartime, leaving lessons that would persist long after the guns fell silent. With the aftermath fully understood, the story now turns to reflection, a moment to contemplate the broader significance of these events, their place in history, and what they reveal about courage, innovation, and human adaptability. The story of American women driving trucks and tanks past German prisoners in the final months of World War II is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to human adaptability, courage, and the quiet ways in which ordinary individuals can reshape extraordinary circumstances. These women were not seeking fame or recognition. They were fulfilling a need born of necessity, responding to the logistical challenges of a massive, continent-spanning conflict. Yet their presence reverberated far beyond supply lines, challenging assumptions, altering perceptions, and leaving an enduring mark on both Allied and enemy observers. The psychological impact on German POWs underscores the power of perception in warfare. For soldiers steeped in rigid doctrines of gender and hierarchy, the sight of women operating heavy machinery with skill and composure was disorienting, even humbling. It was a moment where the human element intersected with technology and tactics to produce not only operational success, but cultural disruption. The war in its final months was no longer just a clash of armies. It was a collision of expectations, revealing that courage, competence, and determination are not bound by gender. For the women themselves, the experience affirmed capability, resilience, and the value of meticulous training. Each mile driven, each engine repaired, was a demonstration of professionalism that transcended traditional definitions of service. Their actions contributed tangibly to the Allied advance, saved lives by ensuring steady supply lines, and inspired confidence among their comrades. They became living proof that necessity, skill, and discipline define a soldier, not uniform or anatomy. Historically, these convoys offer lessons that resonate beyond the battlefield. They highlight the importance of leveraging human potential, the operational advantages of inclusivity, and the moral weight of recognizing competence wherever it is found. In the silence after the guns fell, the memory of these women driving trucks and tanks remained, a quiet, resolute symbol of adaptability, ingenuity, and courage under pressure. In the end, the Remagen convoys remind us that history is not shaped solely by generals or battles, but by the individuals who step forward, meet the challenge, and redefine what is possible. And sometimes the most profound victories are measured not in territory gained, but in the boundaries broken along the way.